Good afternoon. I want to thank Accelerating Genetics for having me come and provide the opportunity for me to come speak to you about calf environments. It's something I've been very interested in since I was about 15, and tried to learn a few things over the years. Of course, calf raising objectives are pretty simple. It's optimizing the growth of that animal during this period of time, and also minimizing the health problems that may occur during the first 2 months of age or so, or pre-weaning. However, there are some threats to calf health and growth. They're listed here in the fecal-oral transmission of organisms, manure meals in another word, calf-to-calf contact, primarily those ill calves that may be touching each other and spreading disease that way, poor air quality with respect to moisture and gas levels within the building and within the individual pen, airborne pathogens, their dust and things that viruses can attach to and be drawn into the lungs and cause problems. And of course, filth. Damp, wet, dirty conditions do not create a good environment for calves. Drafts, which can further increase stress on an animal and lower her immunity and make her more susceptible to diseases that may be present. And of course, extreme heat and cold. Calves are born with an immature immune system. And as a result, we need to reduce the stressors that surround that calf so that they can thrive. Stress further reduces that immunity and makes them more susceptible to those diseases. It seems over the years, as I've studied calf housing design and visited farms and so on, that there seems to be an infinite number of alternatives available to producers today to house calves. But what I have found that the best ones that seem to work and that calves thrive in seem to contain these things: a dry, comfortable resting area, excellent air quality, good access to feed and water, and a confident footing. These are the things that provide an environment that calves can thrive in. There are also some desirable features that give the caregiver the opportunity to perform their task properly, completely, and consistently. They include a good observation and access, simple restraint and isolation, easy feeding, and easy cleaning. In 1997, I set forth to write a paper on a unique calf building design that had been done at Mason-Dixon Farms in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. But what I found as I started doing more research for this paper is the interesting process of trial and error that they went through to actually create this design. In 1969, their calves were housed in an environmentally controlled facility with fans. It was heated and so on. And what they experienced for a number of years was 40% mortality rate and 40% morbidity rate. This inspired one of Richard Wainwright's sons to become a veterinarian, because after 4 different changes to the environment, including all in, all out, separate rooms, things like that, they still realized the performance that they had started with, this 40% mortality, 40% morbidity. Doyle Wainwright, another son of Richard, attended a herdsman school in Wisconsin, and what he noticed out here was this calf hutch that was being used. And he found that these calves seemed to be doing well in all types of seasons, in all types of conditions. And so he wrote a letter back and sent some pictures, and being Mason-Dixon Farms, they built their version of calf hutches, abandoned the old environmentally controlled facility, and what they found is that the calves began to thrive, but the caregivers began to grumble, because now they were exposed to the elements during extreme weather conditions. And so their next version was to put a shelter over those things, keeping the same advantages they found in the hutch as far as pen size and things like that, but put a shelter over it to provide a little more environmental comfort for the caregiver so that they could perform their task more properly. There was quite a elaborate gating arrangement so that they could clean this facility using a skid steer, but they also found that after use, this became very cumbersome, and it was a lot of work in order to clean those individual pens that they were doing. They also found that the pens became very uncomfortable during the summer months, and so they needed to do something like that. So in 1989, they went through a design process and built a new 75-stall shelter, which contained a lot of the same elements that the calf hutch and the intermediate building had used, 4 by 12 pens with an 8-foot bedded area, a 4-foot paddock area in the feeding area, and also opened up the back rear panel so that during the summer it improved ventilation at the pen level for that calf and provide a lot of comfort for that calf during summer months. They also designed the building so it could be cleaned more easily. They used a cantilever design out front so that an offset blade attached to a skid steer could now weekly scrape the front concrete area of this pen. And then they also developed equipment for their skid steer that could pull the bedding from the rear of the building. And these pens could now be cleaned individually rather than as a group. And so in 1991, they built a similar version. And so now they have two of those buildings. And their current mortality rate for the last several years has been less than 2% mortality on approximately 1,200 heifer calves per year. And so they're very pleased with the performance of that system. Well, what that taught me is that the lessons learned there is if you offer the calves an environment they can thrive in and also provide the caregivers an opportunity to do their jobs properly, completely, and consistently, that probably provides the opportunity for a very productive environment for calves. So remembering these dairy housing, calf housing basics, let's look into some other things. As an agricultural engineer, I am very confident that environmentally controlled calf facilities can be built and managed properly to provide a good environment for those calves. However, experience shows me that sometimes management, energy costs, things like that, caregiver comfort, overtake maybe the priority, which should be the calf's environment, and sometimes these systems fail. I'm also very intrigued by the automatic computer calf feeders that are being offered on the market now, which provide the opportunity for group housing. But still, we're not going to cover that today. We're going to focus on naturally ventilated calf shelters with individual pens. They're very popular in the Northeast and Upper Midwest. Of course, remembering these threats to the calf health and growth, then that gives us a good idea of the designs that we tend to want to favor and look into a little bit closer. Certainly, we want to isolate calves from mature animals and also avoid commingling with animals of the same age as well. Providing individual pens so that we can have that individual feeding, observation, and care, and also minimize disease transmission. Provide that individual space and an environment that is going to keep that calf comfortable during all seasons of the year. When we look into the size of that pen, we favor those that are at least 32 square feet in size, approximately 4 by 8, with a depth or a length to width ratio of 2 to 1. And this allows that calf the opportunity, if the pen is designed properly, to escape drafts by getting to the rear of the pen if they need to, provide some adjustment, and also can promote cleanliness, as we'll get into in a little bit. If we have a pen that is shorter, just the way the heifer calves are designed is that feed goes in, other materials come out. And that distance is about 4 feet. And in a short pen, that waste material is probably going to fall into an area where that calf is going to rest. And it's going to mat down her hair coat and cause some problems. So that front part of the pen is going to get more soiled than the rear part, and so it doesn't leave much clean area for that calf to rest in. We'd rather see a pen that's at least 8 feet deep to allow a cleaner area towards the rear of that pen to rest in, away from the feeding area. And of course, I still favor pens that are a little bit larger than that. In this case, a 4 by 12 or a 3 to 1 length to width ratio, which provides more bedded area and the opportunity to keep that feeding area managed a little bit better for cleanliness. There's also been some work done at the University of Wisconsin measuring some of the airborne bacteria in the air and found that larger pen sizes, for instance, a 40 square foot pen is going to have about half the concentration of airborne bacteria that a smaller pen, say 24 or 28 square feet, is going to be. We prefer to see solid size, one to separate the calves as well as to provide some protection from drafts, approximately 4 feet high with easy to clean materials so that the pen condition between occupants is going to be more consistent. And also an adjustable rear panel, perhaps solid for the bottom 18 to 24 inches, but have the ability to open it above there for warm weather to provide a better air exchange, to help provide more comfort for that calf, as well as reduce the airborne pollutants that are in there and keep the pen dry. And a hover, well, that's a question. And While over the years I've recommended hovers, especially in open front facilities, there's some questions of that right now. I'm not ready to abandon the hover because it does provide draft protection, but there is a micro environment that's created at the back of that pen that the hover is going to contain air in, and we need to look at that as well. We like to prevent calf-to-calf contact. That can be done, of course, by separation of the pens, which is the easiest thing to do, or by barriers, which prevent that reach from pens that may be adjoining. Wire pens, especially close together, offer little protection. Little protection from that calf-to-calf contact, those manure meals that they'll get, as well as draft protection, so we need to think about that. We need to provide a generous bedding layer so that we have a dry, erect hair coat, so that air can be captured in between the hair fibers, so that it creates an insulation layer in cold weather to keep that calf more comfortable, help to retain heat. It also promotes cleanliness. That wet, matted coat is not going to help that calf hold in heat at all. Again, the University of Wisconsin, some information that's come out recently I think is very good with respect to generous bedding layer, and they defined it as nesting levels. And nesting level 1 is if the calf is resting on top, her legs are exposed. Resting level 2, she is in a bedding that she can nestle into now, and you can partially see her rear legs. Nesting level 3, she's more deeply nestled into that bed, and now that back leg is completely covered. And they found that in very extreme temperatures now, these low temperatures, these calves can retain their heat and remain very comfortable and thrive. And so these nesting levels, I think, are something that producers need to look into and provide depending on the season of the calves. I just got this picture of nesting level 4. I'm sure there are other degrees of nesting levels, but here she's just about fully covered. But in their studies, Dr. Norland and others at the University of Wisconsin, they looked at these airborne bacteria's levels in these pens. And on the vertical axis there is the prevalence of respiratory disease. On the horizontal axis, airborne bacteria, colony forming units they were actually able to grow there. And these different types of housing. This one is an open-sided pen with that nesting score of 1. And you can see that as the bacteria levels, even when they're relatively low, the prevalence of respiratory disease is pretty high. A solid-sided pen with a nesting score of 3, even with very high concentrations of airborne bacteria, the prevalence of respiratory disease is relatively low. Here's an open-sided pen with a nesting score of 3. Open-sided, but now that calf is able to really nest in that and stay comfortable. The prevalence is much lower. And here's a solid side with only a nesting score of 1. So you can see that this nesting score really does have a significant effect on the comfort of that calf in that pen. Seasonal bedding, I think in cold weather, most producers favor straw. Straw has structure. Again, it can trap air in between the fibers, and so it helps that calf retain heat. They can nestle into it. Sawdust isn't as good as that. Sawdust and shavings don't allow them to nestle as well. However, in warm weather, sawdust is often preferred because of the fly populations are greatly reduced when this is used. Also, as that calf is in there, we want to try to keep fresh bedding between soil bedding and the calf. And it's recommended maybe 3 inches of bedding between that soil bedding, or perhaps even remove that soil bedding. What a concept. And replace it with fresh, dry bedding as a result. We want to provide idle time between occupants so that any organisms that might be there, we can help break that cycle, get them down to a level where they won't challenge the health of the next occupant. Generally, it's recommended 7 to 14 days to have that pen cleaned out and idle. This requires more pens than calves that you would expect in a year. And so to provide this 7 to 14 day idle time, you may need 15 to 25% more pens than heifer calves that you'll have. And that's with quote-unquote uniform calving throughout the year. And if there's any farms in Wisconsin that have uniform calving, let me know. I haven't been able to find any in Pennsylvania yet. If you want to allow for these bulges in times where you may have more heifers than bulls, or seasons where you may have more calvings, you may require 30 to 50% more pens than you have experienced heifer calves, simply because of these bulges that are there. You need to provide this idle time. Sometimes this can be done, especially if you have a building. You might have some auxiliary hutches that you use during these times of these expansions, but you do need to supply this in order to break the disease cycle. And you can consult your farm records, get a more accurate percentage of these and so on. Air quality, of course, is extremely important. And our goal is to have air quality with respect to moisture, gases, and other pollutants at similar levels to what they are outside the calf pen. Notice that temperature is not there, because again, with these proper bedding, proper nutrition, calves can do very well in extremely cold temperatures as long as things are designed properly. In cold weather, we want to provide protection from cold winds and precipitation, protection from drafts, and maintain desirable levels of moisture, gases, and pollutants in that area. And keep that inside temperature within 5 to 10 degrees of what it is outside. It seems that if we increase those temperature differences between inside and outside, that's when the moisture buildup, gas buildup, respiratory problems, and of course we know that lung damage is permanent damage. And that can affect that cow when calf becomes a heifer and a cow when it comes to heat stress conditions. Have you ever been in a barn where you see two cows lying down next to each other on a very hot day? One's breathing comfortably and the other's panting. Perhaps that might be due to some lung damage that was experienced as a calf. And of course, proper nutrition and bedding are extremely important in these colder times to provide the energy so they can create heat, as well as the ability to hold the heat that they're producing in. And in the natural ventilation system, wind is the primary driver of air exchange, especially in calf shelters where this thermal buoyancy of heating the air up and it rising isn't really a factor because of the volume in these buildings compared to the heat that they're generating. During hot weather conditions, we want to provide shade. Basically, that pen or that building ought to be an umbrella that shades that animal, but still allows breezes to come through to provide comfort and good air exchange at the calf level. And again, maintain those desirable moisture, gases, and pollutants. And temperatures should be close to what they are in the shaded area. You're not going to get much less in a naturally ventilated shelter than what you might be sitting under that tree. Again, wind is the primary divider. The hutches showed us that natural ventilation in this individual housing can do very well. But people often tell me, Dan, I need something else because I want to keep the pens dry and I want to stay out of these extreme weather conditions. And, well, maybe I want a little more comfort for myself, too. I don't know which order that's in, but often this is it. So the first thing I'll say is, well, why not put the hutch in a building? We know that the pen dimensions, we know the idea that individual housing works. Why not try to make it a little more comfortable for the caregiver? We can do that in a number of ways, and we really don't need much of a building in order to do that. Just one that's going to provide shade and comfort, perhaps one curtain for extreme weather on the prevailing wind side. But certainly I'm curious why this design hasn't been promoted a lot more. But it hasn't, and so we work with other types of open-fronted shelters that do that. We want to orient that building so it blocks prevailing winds. We also want to provide shade in the summer, but we also want to allow sunlight intrusion during the colder months in order to help warm that calf, help dry the bedding, help warm the bedding in that pen, so that orientation becomes important. We usually like to orient it so it's going to be perpendicular and block those prevailing winds, but prevailing winds don't always come from one direction. They tend to vary, and they're very site-specific, and so you have to look at that. With open front shelters, we generally like to see the open front oriented somewhere between south and east in order to take advantage of that, and also take advantage of the sunlight intrusion. In southern Pennsylvania, we can look at a shelter like this that might be oriented to get sunlight exposure directly into the pen. And then during the summer, when the sun is at its higher angle, then we can shade that pen. We can take advantage of that roof design in order to shade in the summer, provide sunlight intrusion in the winter months. Open front calf shelters also have a concern in that there's sometimes some wind swirl. If we block that rear wall, that wind comes around the end and you can actually look to the southeast or south and get hit in the face with wind. And that brings a draft then back into those pens at some portion of the building. And so we like to put swirl barriers in, and generally with calf buildings of this size, open front calf buildings, they'll be anywhere from 8 to 12 feet on center down the length of the building to block those drafts. And they do that in addition to the solid sides which are on that pen. And it works quite well. During cold weather, we want solid sides and a solid rear panel to provide that draft protection. And then a hover there. And that hover doesn't necessarily need to cover the entire pen, maybe 4 feet and adjustable so that during some of those warmer times we can take it away and provide a little more air exchange in that pen area. Because that pen does have a microenvironment. If you're preventing drafts, you're also reducing the air exchange that's going on there too. And so you need to look at that. And so that's where you might pull that hover away, increase the amount of bedding, and improve the nutrition in order to hold that. But we want to certainly provide a comfortable environment. During warm weather, opening that back panel up, allowing those breezes through to provide a better air exchange and air quality for that animal at that level. One concern I have with hutches sometimes that there's not enough of that opening at the rear of the pen in order to provide summertime comfort for calves. And often I'll go see in hutch situations where you've got calves standing out in direct sunlight on a very hot day, and is that where they want to be? Or would they rather be in that shaded area? So calves are a good indicator of that. Sometimes, as a result, producers will take a concrete block and elevate the back to provide a little better air exchange, but I'd like to see a better design to open more of that back panel up to provide more of an air exchange. In calf buildings, we're seeing more and more circulation fans put in to provide some cooling breezes during extremely hot weather in these pens, help to circulate air within those pens to provide better air quality. Calf buildings with curtain sides, again, these are cold shelters. We want to block the prevailing winds, still allow summer sun to come in if possible, but provide shade during the summer. North-south orientation in many places, turning that building so it is perpendicular to prevailing winds is preferred. However, there is a problem with summer sunlight intrusion. In the morning, a north-south oriented building, you get sun in the morning into those pens, which may cause some heat stress, but of more of concern is the late afternoon sun, which comes in there. And you can't necessarily block that just with eave overhangs and things like that. And so an east-west orientation is usually the best to control that shade line in the pen level, provide that umbrella and that shade protection for those pens. Sidewall height, I'd like to see at least 10 feet. In many cases, this has to do with the equipment that's used to clean it. Wider buildings maybe have to be a little bit more, a little bit higher in order to provide a little bit better relationship of sidewall height and opening to the width of the building. Sidewall opening as much as possible because, again, we want it just to be a shade during the summer and just essentially be a pavilion that's covering these pens. But it should be adjustable for the season. And also, management of that building is that in many of these situations, we find that the prevailing wind side curtain can be closed, but the leeward side of the building could be open to provide a better air exchange, more sunlight intrusion, and so on. Roof slope of 4 to 12. Ridge opening can be continuous. We generally recommend 2 inches for every 10 feet of building width, with a minimum of 8 inches being that continuous ridge. But we can also, for a little better weather control or maybe more adjustment of the air exchange, intermittent stacks or square stacks in order to provide that weather protection and maybe more adjustment of the air exchange in that building during extremely cold weather. Primarily in calf buildings, more enclosed calf buildings, we favor insulation along the roof line. This reduces condensation in the building, which may occur and drip into the pens, causing wet conditions. However, if you keep that building temperature within 5 to 10 degrees of what it is outside, condensation usually isn't a big problem. But it also can reduce the radiant load during the summer and provide a little more comfort at that time of the year. Think of that building as a big umbrella, providing the shade good air exchange for the calves at the pen level. And again, circulation fans may be necessary during some extremely hot times of the year to provide a little more comfort for those animals. Cold weather, same criteria that we use with the open front. Again, trying to keep that temperature within 5 to 10 degrees. But now, because we've got an enclosed pen within an enclosed building, and often during the winter time, that building becomes more closed than it needs to be. And then that pen environment is going to be a little bit higher concentration of gases, moisture, and pollutants in there. So hovers in these buildings are a real question now, but we need to make up for the lack of draft protection provided by those in the amount of bedding that is in those pens. And here's some of the work that Dr. Norland did with his colleagues. The black versions here are airborne bacteria concentrations in the alley where the caregiver is. And then these other ones were quite variable, you can see, but that's the pen airborne bacteria levels within the pen where the calf is living. And so that's highly variable. And so we want to, in their case, they removed the hovers and also looked into putting in positive pressure ventilation systems at a relatively low rate, approximately 15 cubic feet per minute per calf, blowing in there in order to dilute or uniformly distribute this fresh air throughout the building, direct it towards the pens to allow a relatively draft-free exchange of this air and provide a better environment for those calves at that level. Just graphically here, here's this pen in the middle. The air goes in and then is uniformly distributed down the length of the building, providing more predictable air exchange as well as uniformly distributing that fresh air along the length of the building. When it comes to good access to feed and water, we want to feed away from the resting area. And that's to keep the resting area cleaner and drier, because the feeding area tends to be a little wetter, a little more dirty than other portions of the pen. In this case, they had the caregiver alley along the back of the pens. It's an open front facility. You can see there's an opening for the calf to get their head through to the pail, which opened up a draft opportunity in this situation, and it just didn't work out real well. We want to avoid fixed feed containers that cannot be cleaned easily. They generally become very undesirable for a calf to even stick their nose into. We prefer removable, easy-to-clean containers that have secure holders, especially open front facilities because of wind and so on. But we want to put that in place. Locate the containers outside of the pen area. Provides an opportunity for more pen space to begin with. It also reduces possible contamination of the liquid and solid feed areas since it is outside of the pen. Located at a convenient height. I have a colleague who also raises heifers with a partner, and he swears that 12 inches is where that should be the maximum height a calf reaches over in order to eat or drink. He notices less scouring and so on. I don't know how much study has been done, but at least on his farm it works. We say 12 to 18 inches, that height from the standing surface that calf is on. We like to separate so that they're not dragging water into the feed area or feed bucket and feed into the water bucket. And so a barrier can work very well with that as well, so that they only have access to one container at a time. And there has been some work where they found that where these barriers or separation is in place, they find better gains per pound of feed consumed. And that's usually because you're not throwing the waste feed away. And so you're making better use of the feed material. You want to clean and sanitize those containers regularly, more frequently with sick calves, especially if they're hanging their head in the bucket. Those ill calves that may just have their head in the bucket and then some of their nasal discharges, things like that, are contained there and just going to make things worse and worse for them. And then offer fresh, frost-free water continuously to that calf in all seasons, especially during hot weather, so that they have the opportunity to drink that. Confident footing, provide a stable, well-drained, non-skid surface. We certainly want to avoid situations where it's going to provide a filthy situation for that calf, as well as one of our extension veterinarians is very concerned about the environment that is created for the hooves of the calf or heifer during that time, softening the hoof and creating hoof problems later in life. And so we want to have an area where the calves are standing and stay clean and dry. With earth-based materials, we might create a base under the hutches that is 6 to 12 inches deep, a stone and gravel mix. There are a number of ways that people have done this. I usually like to see some kind of a geotextile that will allow the drainage of moisture, but will not allow the organic bedding materials to mix in with that stone and gravel mix and grow in organisms over a period of time. But even with that, periodically, that base needs to be replaced. I remember one calf raiser in a presentation I sat in, they went through a ton of gravel per year per hutch, which sounds like a lot of material, but he had very good success with his calves, and I thought it was something. And someone asked him, what do you do with all that stone? He says, boy, do I have good driveways. And so maybe there's an added benefit to using that much material. A concrete base, a lightly textured surface that is going to prevent slipping, but isn't so rough that it's going to cause damage to that calf's hoof. Generously bed the surface, of course, because it's going to be a hard base, and also that bedding is going to need to absorb some liquid, urine and things like that. Remove wet soil bedding as quickly as possible, and then slope it towards the front of the pen so the drainage is away from the resting area. Limiting stress is an undervalued approach to solving calf health problems. And I think that some of the stressors that can be imposed there are certainly inconsistency in the diet or presentation of feed, limited availability of solid feed and water, inadequate feeding during cold weather or illness, and failure to provide a clean, draft-free housing. Now you realize of these 4 things, 3 of them aren't related to housing. They're related to the care and management that they receive. And so that's why it's important to have these desirable features for the caregiver. That good observation and access to those animals, simple isolation and restraint so that they can be cared for, easy feeding, easy cleaning so that these things get done properly, consistently, and completely. And it's the old thing, if it's easier to do, it's more likely to get done. And so we want to put features in place that allow this. Locate the shelter in a regularly observed area, so that just during regular work routines, not necessarily when you have to go take care of the calves, you may have the opportunity to look in that shelter and see what's going on. Also, easy access to individual pens, rather than having to climb over wire or something like that. If you can get in easily, that caregiver is more likely to get in there and take care of the problem more quickly. Of course, provide adequate lighting because the days are getting shorter and we still need to care for calves. Provide that good lighting, and then during all times of the day, code those calves for easy identification because they're being moved through this facility. There's a new group regularly. Provide an area for storage of records and healthcare items that are close by so that they can respond more quickly as needed to the problems that may occur. Simple isolation and restraint. Isolation is no problem with individual pens. They're there. But how you restrain them, whether you've got a couple of good legs to hold them in place or a rope halter, or maybe a calf-sized stanchion at the front to restrain that animal for periodic treatment and so on, and observation. Locate the feeding area close by, at or close by the calf facility. Provide a sink with hot and cold running water. Of course, racks for drying and storage of containers and utensils, and adequate heat, light, ventilation. Also, drainage away from that is also important as well. Easy feeding, an area to place bagged items, bulk items, conveniently located so that caregiver can get to those and distribute them properly. Simplify the transport of the containers. The more calves you have, it may be a mobile feeder of some type, or a wagon or something that allows multiple containers to be taken at the same time, just to reduce the trips, make it more convenient for that caregiver. For cleaning, designs that allow mechanical cleaning usually are favored over ones that require manual cleaning. And so a pen design that allows simple movement of those panels and so on away so that the skid steer can get in place, or perhaps designing equipment to allow, or the pen to clean more easily with equipment that's designed specifically for that particular operation. But also allow easy access to those hand tools too. Don't forget them, because the final work sometimes needs to be done with a scraper, shovel, or a hoe. Providing a comfortable, low-stress environment during all seasons is an important element to a successful heifer rearing program. But don't forget the other parts. Don't forget about the environment for the cow that's providing an environment for the calf during the later stages of gestation. And generally, that animal has special needs. She needs a little bit more feeding space so that she has the opportunity to eat when she wants to eat and when she is able to, and also more space to help keep her cleaner and in better shape at this larger size that she's experiencing. And also, don't blow anything that you may have gained through calf housing by taking them into this weaned heifer housing, this next stage that may set them back. And so there's this weaned heifer housing, transition housing, that is a little bit different than more mature heifer housing that we may need to consider. And that usually has smaller groups, a little bit more draft protection, a little bit more feeding space for the size of the animal there, a little bit different design. The calf shelter alternatives, again, seem infinite. And even the poorly designed ones can sometimes be very successful with excellent management. But I don't think we want to do that. I think we want excellent designs and excellent management. So let's put that into place. If we know what the threats are to the animal, to this calf growth and health, then we can respond to them in different designs and management of those designs. The calf huts taught us some good lessons. We need to separate calves from more mature animals. We also need to keep these calf housing basics in mind. Dry, comfortable resting area, excellent air quality, good access to feed and water, and a confident footing. If you're interested, we have some idea plans available online in the Penn State Ag and Bioengineering website. You can go to here, just www.ade.edu will get you there. But there's some idea plans on different calf housing designs, heifer designs, and weaned heifer shelters. Also, NRAIS has the plans all in a book that are available to sale through various sources. You can go to nrais.org and order it. I believe that Forrest Dairyman also handles it. Your extension office may be able to get it for you, and so on. There are over 70 idea plans and details in there on different calf, weaned heifer housing designs. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this subject. If you've got any questions, I'd be happy to stick around.